While the world media is expected to descend on London following the death of Queen Elizabeth, now our question this morning is, does Africa's own royalty receive the same media coverage? Well, former President Jacob Zuma's lawyers have launched a private prosecution against News 24 journalist Karyn Maughan. Well, is this a sign of things to come when journalists report on things? Will they get prosecuted? Well, hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. This is where we give you the opportunity to probe the relationship between the public and the media in all its different facets. My name is Naledi and I'm your host with you for the next hour. Connect with us via our social media channels and share your views and concerns about how the media works and what we feed you. On Twitter, use hashtag SABC Media Society. Or give us a call over the next hour, 011-714-0661 or 714-0662. So on the passing of Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, a Reuters article had information about what they call retained anger in British colonial times and recalled the brutal 1950s crushing of Kenya's Mau Mau rebellion as the sun set on Britain's empire, and a huge diamond that the British royal family acquired from South Africa in 1905, which the now late British Queen never returned, despite calls for her to do so. Reuters is British. America's CNN reported on the same terrible legacy of the British royal family in Africa. But such criticism has been quite visible in Africa. Why? What is the narrative in Africa exactly over the passing of the Queen, and especially over the rest of the continent? And really, how should we be reporting on the death of the Queen and British royalty overall? Joining me in this discussion is Mare and Lebohang Pheko, a senior research fellow and political economist. And also joining us is Professor Adriaan Basson from the University of Johannesburg. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. And Mare Pheko, I'd like to start with you. I'm so happy that you're able to speak to us, because I think that what we've done over the past few days is really try to do a balancing act of how we speak about the passing of the Queen. How have you felt about how the media has fared?
I've been quite vociferous in recent days about, and I guess contributed to some of how the media is framing this. And I suppose, I think in South Africa in particular, and across the African continent and the African diaspora, including the Caribbean most notably, and some smatterings of the Black American community, there is a sense of deep ambivalence at best, outrage and anger, and a deep sense of resentment that, of course, this is two things, that this is an opportunity to have a reckoning around a colonial legacy, and that the passing of Mare Elizabeth is also the opportunity to pass the baton and bury the many colonial imperial legacies, but also to discuss them openly and to ask about what the implications of this are, what the implications of the physical passing of basically one of the final remnants of a particular kind of imperialism has passed. Another piece of that, of course, is that there's a generational shift. So many of the people who are paying respects and who feel fairly on the continent, in particular, the head of state of Ghana, I noticed outgoing President Uhuru Kenyatta, who noted very importantly that Queen Elizabeth of England, that she heard of the passing of her father whilst on Kenyan soil in the 1950s. And you mentioned the Mau Mau atrocities, but I think, Naledi, that what's very significant is that she would have been aware of the Mau Mau atrocities if she was there at that time. That is a very important point. She could not have been blind and deaf to the atrocities that were taking place that were concurrent with her long visit to Kenya, and yet to have never pronounced on them in subsequent years in the name of so-called apoliticization or being a figure that is above politics. So all of these memories and all of these historical contradictions are coming to the fore, and there's a whole generation of younger people, younger scholars, younger activists, and younger African citizens in and out of the diaspora who are extremely angry at the colonial legacy and its ongoing imprint, because the past is still with us. You mentioned this Star of Africa that I've been talking about the last few years, the last few days, that is on one of the late Elizabeth's crown, the late Mare Elizabeth's crown, and that fact that it was never brought back. That is a sign that is a very visceral symbol that our history is still very much with us, and that we can't just brush things away. It is possible to have empathy whilst also being critical. The two are not mutually exclusive. And I think I'd also like to end by saying that it's also important not to be selective about the manner in how grief is prescribed. I think it's very problematic for people to gaslight and to prescribe how people should feel, policing people's emotions, and when one looks at the way, for example, that the Western media covered the killing, frankly, of people like late Colonel Gaddafi in such humiliating photographs and footage, dehumanizing footage that was shown of his remains, as it were. Same can be said about, say, somebody like President Saddam Hussein, who was actually displayed almost undressed just before his passing. So who gets to be respected? Who gets to be honored? And why is there a hierarchy of how we express grief, honor, and respect for different people even?
Sure. That's a mouthful, Pheko. Prof, I want to come to you now. Good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us. As soon as we heard of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom, we saw our own royalty here at home, from the royal family of the Mandela family all the way to the family of the royal family of AmaZulu. At what point, right, was our own royal families really supposed to speak out? Did they do the right thing? Were they honoring the Queen in the right way? What was your reaction when you saw our own royal families then speaking out and wishing condolences to the family of the Queen?
Thank you so much, Naledi. I think certainly this is a complex story to cover for the media, but certainly I think as Pheko is pointed out, I think there's a lot that needs to be unpacked when you talk about somebody's legacy. You can't focus more on the positives only and then try and whitewash the negatives. I think that is really unfortunate. And I think, as you have rightly pointed out, in terms of our own royal families here, I think certainly, of course, it's right for them to pass their own condolences, but at the same time, when you're doing that, you also need to foreground, the colonial imprint that remains part and parcel of our everyday lives. Colonialism, yes, political independence was attained in Africa, but economic independence, as you rightly, see, is still not yet there. And I think we need to see why is it that we continue to have these challenges that we continue to have, and why is it that Africans really are very much ambivalent to what has happened in the UK. It's not just because people want to be ambivalent, but they understand that she is a symbol of what colonialism, as it was, in the 1800s was, and she represents that. And now that she's dead, people should not be told how to ventilate their traumas, how to speak out when such kind of things happen. There's no right time, there's no wrong time. Any time is tea time, and I think we need to appreciate that. Unfortunately, the media in the West has given us this narrative that the way we are trying to showcase the negative aspects of your reign is unfortunate, and it's not the right time. And I think that is a problem, because we as Africans also have got a right to speak out when we feel that things have not really happened the way it should have happened even in our own continent here.
I wonder sometimes, Pheko, I come back to you now, I wonder sometimes if the media in and of itself takes into cognizance what the South African public or the African public actually is discussing, right? There was on the day that Queen Elizabeth II passed, there was a narrative on screen and a very different narrative on social media. Are those two things listening to each other? And that's essentially what I'm trying to get at here, is the media reflecting the real perspective of South Africans?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I mean, immediately in the wake of the Queen of England's passing, I mean, within minutes, Naledi and Professor Mare, the memes immediately began to manifest within a minute or two. And I was watching the whole thing very closely, understanding that this is a historical moment. The memes, some of them extremely irreverent, quite strongly worded, and very honest and robust in really critiquing immediately the meaning of this. Some making reference to the demise, the very still controversial and sad demise of Princess Diana, for example, and so on and so forth, and making those comparisons, and others which were on the less palatable side, but as we say, people should not be policed, But I think that what was interesting was that on the one hand, in the mainstream media, the white stream media, more of the TV media were predominantly the Western, and even some of our local media, respectfully, Alcina Lady, was extremely, trying to push the reverent, the very reverent, very almost the tutelage, trying to draw on this, drawing on this. We have also lost our mother, our grandmother. We have strong ties to Britain. Those ties are blood soaked. Those ties are colonial ties. Those ties were violent. And I think that whilst it's important that, especially as African people, of course, we are always compassionate and so forth, we are still human after all. Ubuntu. But that cannot be, we cannot then be completely uncritical and also amnesiac. And my colleague, Prof. Admire, he makes an important point about this notion of timing. We are often told that it is too soon. It is ever too soon to make comments and to make critical assessments of the circumstances that cause us pain. It's either too soon or it's too late. So we are either told, as people who have been oppressed and brutalized, that it is too soon, or that it's in the history. It is in the past. Why are we bringing up old things? When is it ever the right time to say something? And this ongoing gaslighting by those who have shaped a narrative, those who have shaped imperial power and power relations, who continue to shape, and who also are part of the media fraternity, the media machinery, the institutional and cultural machinery of continuing to silence Black and brown people's anger globally. You'll see, I see that in India, the same ambivalences across the Caribbean, as I already mentioned, anywhere where there is a British footprint, the same ambivalences are manifesting. Why is it then that the media, the mainstream media, is so unwilling, I suppose, to marry the sentiments of people on the ground, and the huge disconnect between what some of the heads of state are saying and what people on the ground are saying? Other people are saying, why are we even having these conversations? I am even ambivalent, Ausna Lady and Abuti Admire, that I myself the last few days have spent so much time on this topic. Meanwhile, there's Pala, there's Zondo community. We have our own things. There's a war going on in Ethiopia. We have our own things. I am also ambivalent about my own presence in actually giving this so much more oxygen.
I wonder though, and Prof, I'm coming to you now, because Pheko was talking about something that's quite important. Why did we give this issue so much energy? But as a media practitioner, a part of me almost wants to defend my position, Prof, and say the content is there. As soon as the Queen passed, we were able to see every element of it, and it was available on so many different platforms that as a media company and as a media practitioner, the content was there. Compare that, for instance, to the passing of Queen Mantfombi of the Zulu nation. It becomes a struggle to find that content and give it a platform. What do you say to that, Prof?
Thanks a lot, Naledi. It's very worrying that here in Africa we have got so many issues that are happening. For example, Pheko has just talked about what is actually happening in Ethiopia, but it's just like there's a blackout in terms of what is really happening. People are dying every day. Why is it that we can't invest a lot of money and rolling coverage on those kinds of events? Why is it that we can't invest a lot of time and energy to find out what is happening, for example, amongst the Zulu, chieftainship? We need to make sure that we invest a lot of our energy, our resources, so that we can give the Africans the stories that they deserve. Unfortunately, we are forced feeding them stories that probably they don't even want to watch. Why? Because we just get this from wires like Reuters, like AFP. Maybe it's cheaper, I don't know, but I think we need to make sure that we put our own stories at the center, first and foremost, before we push any other stories, because our stories matter first and foremost. That's why we are often represented in stereotypical ways by the West, because we don't give them the content that they deserve. Let us invest in our own content. Let's push our own narratives so that we can make sure that people can understand what actually happens in Africa. We understand more about what happens in Afghanistan. We understand more what happens in Syria. But what happens in Ethiopia, what happens in Cameroon, what is happening in Central African Republic, what is happening in DRC right now? There's no content there. Why is it that Africans find it very difficult to build their own content? I think that is the challenge that we need to face head on right now.
Yeah, well, we are taking your calls on this discussion. 011-714-0661. We've got Ntsikelelo on the line. Ntsikelelo, good morning to you. Thank you so much for calling.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for calling in. What are your thoughts?
My that the media has somehow forgotten, the South African and the African media has somehow forgotten the ills of the past that the British have succumbed us to. And they're now dictating to us Africans how we should mourn and how we should react to the of Queen Elizabeth. And it cannot happen so. Africa has a lot of problems. There's HIV and AIDS that we need to worry about. There are corruption and you name them. And we only hear of the bad things that happen in Africa, but we do not celebrate our own. And we are too quick to go out there and convey our condolences to the Queen who was at the helm, at some point, at the helm of the ills that happened in Africa. We cannot, as Africans, we cannot be told to just get over it. Just forget it. It's in the past. It is not in the past. It's still affecting us even today. Where is the diamond in the stuff that the Queen carries? The crown that the Queen wears on her head? Where are our minerals as Africans? Bring back the minerals. Bring back what is due to Africans. And then we can have bygones be bygones. Otherwise, right now, they cannot dictate to us. I'm Mzwanele from Fort Lawrence.
Wow, thank you so much for calling in, and we'll continue taking more calls as well as we have more of this discussion on the other side of this very short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. So you're still watching Media and Society with myself, Naledi Molewa, and we continue our conversation about really what are your views on how South African media has covered the death of Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom. I'm still in conversation with Mare and Lebohang Pheko, Senior Research Fellow and Political Economist, as well as a Professor at Mare from the University of Johannesburg. We're taking your calls on 011-714-0661. Tinashe is on the line in Zim. Tinashe, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for calling.
Good morning, ma'am. How are you?
I'm very well. We appreciate you giving us your time. What are your thoughts on this discussion?
No, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, Mike, what I must just say is now, we are discussing on this queen, this and that now. We do have our queens here in Africa. Can you imagine, have you ever asked someone else there in Britain, whatever? Do they know our queen here? Nothing. And as we see now, these people, they colonize us here in Africa, especially here in South African stuff, you see. We have our own issues here. Look now what is happening. We should be focusing on the borders. We should be focusing now in the immigration. We should be focusing in Somalia. We should be focusing our African leaders. They should focus on our own African issues. But now we focus on these people. We don't even know them. We don't know what they are contributing us. They're taking their resources. They're taking our diamonds and gold. But we still have to mourn them. Why should we do that? Can we focusing on how African leaders are reading? Look at it, what is happening now in Zimbabwe. Each and every time we need change, the African leaders, they are keeping quiet. But now look at the immigration of the Zimbabweans now in South Africa. Tell the ANC now to stop supporting these leaders of ZANU-PF. Tell them to stop supporting ZANU-PF. We're suffering here, but we're focusing on queens and kings of America. Why not focusing on these issues about these African leaders? Can you imagine why? Where are we going? Where are we going now? Zimbabweans in South Africa, they are mocking everyone here. This Zimbabwean that, this Zimbabwean that. Can African leaders focusing on that?
Tinashe, you are passionate. Thank you so much for calling in. We really, really do appreciate it, and we're taking more calls. Mare and Lebohang, I'm going to bring you in here and say, clearly, even just from listening to Tinashe and Nontsikelelo, you can hear that this is a very emotive issue for South Africans. Over the next few, or for Africans, in fact, over the next few days, you're going to have the pomp and ceremony, right? The journey to the burial of the Queen is a long one. It's the time of mourning. There is an entire program. I wonder if you have examples of what that could look like in an African context when we do that, say, for a Queen Mojaji in our own country. What do you envision? What would that look like, that pomp and ceremony and the attention that we give to it?
A King Mesizulu. I mean, we just have a recent example of an ascension. It was a quick thing, very localized. I think maybe anybody who has an SABC or ENCA platform across the continent, but rest assured that nobody in Britain, in France, in Italy, in the US, Canada, Australia, rest assured that they were not glued to their screens the way that we are being forced to be, force watching this. And, you raise very important questions. I remember as soon as this, just as Mayor Elizabeth was, it was clear that things were not looking good, I think Thursday, Friday, I tweeted something to say it's very interesting that we just had an ascension here of, Morena Mesizulu. And here we are being put into a forced vigil, basically, as a nation, as Africans, for somebody who, as both the callers say, is so far away. Are they actually watching Morena Mesizulu, who means something to many people on this continent? You mentioned Queen Mojaji. When I mentioned to a friend of mine, a Black American friend in the US about this, she was like, my queen is Queen Mojaji. Interesting that you use that example. Most people, Professor Admire and Ausna Lady, if you even put a picture of Queen Mojaji, will they know her, even in this country? Let alone if you go to a street in London or Birmingham or Washington or New York or Paris or Sydney, Australia, will they know them? We in this country, will they even know her? Let's just start right there. And when you speak of that pomp and ceremony, it would look like CNN coming here to cover this important event. It would look like Reuters having this wall-to-wall coverage. It would look like people standing in Trafalgar Square, standing in Times Square, New York, standing outside the Eiffel Tower with big screens like the World Cup, watching this happen in our own indigenous way here, you know, on the African continent, it would look like it being important to them as a global event, because it would look as though we are indeed equal partners and equal parts of the human family. It would not be this hierarchy of the Queen. And I would like to respectfully correct the use of the term the Queen. She was a queen, and I say that with all due respect, because there are many queens, many queens and many kings. We need to get away from, also decolonize ourselves and get away from this notion of this British normativity. And that is the thing. That is why the coverage of Mare Elizabeth is running 24 hours far away, south of the equator, because of that British normative, British imperial imprint and imagination that is so toxic and that is so much a part of our psyche.
Sure. Prof, if I bring you in then and I say, then why are we even doing this, right? What is wrong with South African media, if it really is a problem in your view? What has gone wrong in the South African or the African narrative that you do have that big focus on the pomp and ceremony of Western leaders and very little on our very own leaders as well, right? If you think about where we say what's at the root of it, what do you say?
Certainly, as Mayor Pheko has said, I think it's about this British normativity that we've normalized. We've also adopted this cut and paste journalism, where what happens in the global north, we bring it here without customizing, without localizing it to speak to our own context. We take stories from wires and run them without localizing, giving them meaning to speak to our own context. And I think it's a huge challenge. And I think it also speaks to the idea of how do we decolonize journalism? How do we decolonize our own media systems to speak to our own context? Because at the end of the day, whatever has happened in Britain has happened in Britain, but we also need to find ways, how do we allow that story to come to Africa here and speak to our own audiences in ways that they can relate with, rather than just speak it, use it the same kind of narrative that is being. We're actually doing public relations for the royal family. It's very unfortunate. We are doing a lot of public relations for the royal family, which is very unfortunate, because here is somebody who is almost the last symbol of colonialism. And we are allowing you to just go hook, line, and sinker without problematizing the whole notion of colonialism and its continued after effects in Africa unto this very day. And I think we need to unpack that and say, how do we go forward as journalists? How do we go forward as media houses in Africa so that we can give people what they deserve rather than to force-feed them to just take hook, line, and sinker what is happening in the global north. There's a challenge, I think, in terms of our journalism, and it calls on us as media scholars, but also as trainers, to find ways to try and decolonize the way how we tell our own stories. That's what I would say.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that you're asking, right? That how do we then tackle this issue moving forward? Mayor Pheko, we have now the King of the United Kingdom, King Charles, and I'm going to just take a call, but I really just would like for you to think, Mayor Pheko, a little bit about what the media then should do with this new era of the monarchy of the United Kingdom. How should we then be treating it? But let's take some calls. Johannes is on the line. Johannes, good morning to you. Thank you so much for calling.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, sir. What are your thoughts?
No, I'm good. No, I think it is very good to cover the thing of the but one question that I have for you is that a lot of people, we are very worried about the minerals that she looted on our continent. So I'm surprising where our leaders, we have a lot of leaders in Africa, presidents, they don't say anything, but general people like me that are worried about that. That is my question.
Yeah. And that yeah, you see, what you're saying is interesting, because you're essentially saying there is a market that wants to see our own leaders. Mayor Pheko, Janice, thank you so much for calling. Mayor Pheko, how do we make sure that we do this? What is your call to action? I suppose that's what I'm asking you. What's your call to action to South African and African media under the new era of King Charles III?
Thanks. And I think I want to pick up on something that Prof. Maya said, which I resonates very deeply. This notion of speaking into these issues and not problematizing them. Now, the coverage is important because, well, we are a global community, but certainly it can't be uncritical. It's almost like the same argument that has been made many times around the statues, the upkeep of these colonial and very violent monuments in different parts of the world, including roads and so on. If we're going to retain these relationships, if we're going to report on these incidents, let it be problematized, let it be contextualized, and not be a frozen, one-sided conversation. It has to be a dialectical, a dialogue with history, a dialogue with the complexity, a dialogue with the pain. That to me is much more productive than saying, well, long live the Queen and so on. She was such a wonderful grandmother. She was our mother. Oh, she was in Kenya when she heard about, she was in Cape Town when she turned 21. What was she doing in Cape Town? She was here, probably part of some other colonial architecture. And this again goes into this notion that the British royal family are deaf and blind, and that they are just objects in these situations that they don't understand. These folks have gone to school, they have read, they have advisors. At the least, like most of us, they have access to Google. To act as though they knew nothing, they heard nothing. They are these deaf, mute subjects, objects of circumstances, is extremely disingenuous. I think it even does their own intelligence some disservice. And I do think that going forward, King Charles has shown himself to be interested, and some people think it's problematic, but he's certainly shown himself to be interested in social and public opinions, political opinions, strong opinions on the climate, and so on, and that it's important that in that environment, not to hold him up as some frozen character, but as a character who needs to be involved and who needs to be engaged critically in building solutions and making reparation and restitution for this heavy and complicated legacy that he carries. In some ways, I would actually almost pity him. But I think that if he is honest, if he is indeed a person who seems to be interested in the world around him, beyond the walls of these palaces, on lands that they also took from people, from the working class serfs in many communities, even in Britain, if they want to survive, I think beyond his tenure, and if indeed there is any space for them in the future, then it has to be a very modernized, honest space that cannot be depoliticized. And again, that should not be policed by a few people.
Yeah, I do quite enjoy that idea of honesty from all parties as we have this discussion, from the media, the monarchy, and the world globally, and also the public narrative as it unfolds. Pheko, Prof, I want to give you some time to also think about that, because I think my question will be the same to you. What's your call to action for the media in the new era of King Charles III of the United Kingdom? But Muluki is on the line in Kimberley. Muluki, good morning to you.
Good morning, ma'am.
Thank you so much for calling, Abuti.
Yeah, I look at this matter from 3 points. The first one, as human beings, we all feel sorry if someone passes away.
Yes.
From their point of view, from a humanity perspective. The second issue I look at is, this incident should give us an opportunity to reflect on the colonialism that took place since Bartholomew Dias came here, Jan van Riebeeck, and all that. We must, at this point, this issue must remind us to try to fix some of the things that went wrong. We must try to get back our things, like the diamonds and everybody in all the nations. That is what we must be doing now. We cannot be idolizing a system that has been evil to us. I want to separate the issue of the lady passing away and what her nation did. And we cannot also blame her, because the whole thing was systemic. She was part of a system. She was born into the system. Maybe she should have opted out later when she found what was happening on earth. But my greatest worry is, what is it that we are doing to correct this legacy of colonialism. The class of 1994, when they took over, did they give this thing attention?
It's interesting, Muluki, because you're essentially saying, well, let's focus on the legacy and what we can get back that was taken from us, right? But
Yes.
but essentially, there's an interesting idea here that says, why are we thinking about the diamond now that she has passed? Should we not have thought about that a long time ago? But I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for calling. Prof, last thoughts. I've got about a minute. Please, your final thoughts. The call to action, really. That's what I'm looking for.
All right, thank you. I don't agree with the last caller in terms of separating the queen from from the kingdom. I think the kingdom and the queen are just one and the same thing. It's an extension of the same thing. But my call to action would be to say King Charles has got an opportunity to project an accountable, honest leadership going forward. I think we need, some kind of dialogue between Africa and the rest of the countries that have been colonized by Britain, so that at least restitution and reparations can actually be done. I think it's a long overdue argument, and I think we need to do it as soon as possible.
Yeah. Prof, thank you so much for your time. My guests this morning, Mare and Lebohang Pheko, Senior Research Fellow, Political Economist as well, and Professor Adriaan Basson from the University of Johannesburg. Continue the conversation on Twitter, #SABC Media Society. When we come back, we're talking about politicians in South Africa versus the media, particularly when it comes to taking each other to court. Stay with us. Welcome back to Media and Society. So the Jacob Zuma Foundation accuses advocate Billy Downer of having leaked the former president's medical record. It then says News 24 journalist Karyn didn't get them ethically or perhaps even legally, and they are pursuing a private prosecution. The National Prosecuting Authority, or NPA, says it will not prosecute as it found the accusations baseless. But let's take this discussion further and really understand the parties involved in this one, and also the perspective of the media, where it comes to publishing even medical records of our political leaders. We're joined by Mzwanele Manyi, the spokesperson of the Jacob Zuma Foundation, as well as Adriaan Basson, editor-in-chief at News 24. Gentlemen, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for coming in. And Manyi, I want to start with you and say, as soon as we heard of the news of the private prosecution being pursued, obviously you're on various platforms talking about why this was an important decision for former President Jacob Zuma to pursue it. Let's hear that again, right? Particularly where the involvement of Karyn then gets added into it as a media practitioner.
Yeah, hi Naledi and your viewers. I'm glad that you've given us this opportunity, because there's been a lot of mispeddling of wrong information. I mean, even in your intro, you also talk about the medical records. That's secondary. That's probably aggravating circumstances. The issue here, in fact, I had asked your producer to flight the actual section of the law that we're dealing with. Because what we're dealing with here, we're dealing with the flouting of the law, Section 41, subsection 6 of the NPA Act, which prohibits disclosure of any information to any person. Now, this is very important, choice of words. Disclosure of any information to any person. We are not here, from where we sit, from our perspective, dealing with a journalist. We are just dealing with any person that received information irregularly. This is the issue we're dealing with. That it happens to be Karyn, it's just incidental. The law says any person, you see, if the law had excluded Karyn, had excluded media, the law would have said any person except. There's no exception. The fact that you have information with you as the National Prosecuting Authority, which you should not disclose without the permission of the NDPP. Should you do that, then it means you're flouting the law. It's as simple as that. This case should be open and shut.
Let me ask you this, though. Where are the limitations of that? And I'm going to stick with you for this, because as a media practitioner, my job is to collect information. That's
lawfully.
my job. At what point am I crossing a line?
We are crossing the line at a point when the information is not ready for public consumption for whatever reason. This is why, for instance, sometimes we'd have what would be called an embargoed debriefing,
yes,
as it were, to be able to. But then when that happens, care is taken that the law is not broken in all of that process. Now, in this situation, the law is broken. In this situation, the law has been broken. And by the way, there is no argument that the law has not been broken. There's some rationalization as to why they broke the law. So the only discussion we would be having in court is in mitigation, where Downer does not deny that he broke the law, does not deny that this happened. Karyn does not deny that he received the information before anybody else. I mean, the SABC, a public broadcaster, if anyone needed to be taken into confidence, in my view, would have been the national public broadcaster. Why would you just single out one News 24 person? Why would you do this? It just shows the malice in this thing because they needed to push a particular narrative. If the interest was in the public interest and all of that, then surely all media people would have been brought in. In fact, I'm actually surprised that SABC is not livid about this. SABC should be saying, Downer, how can you call only Karyn Maughan? But SABC seems to be happy with this. I don't know whether it's because you are captured as SA media, as SABC, that you're not even angry about this, that information is just given to Basson, Basson's people and all of that. So, but that's not the issue for us, it's issue for yourselves. The issue for us, we're a law-abiding citizen. We are saying the law says no person shall disclose to any other person. Forget that she's a journalist. So for us, and this, we must not misconstrue the issue here. We're not dealing with a journalist. We're dealing with any person. That is the basis of our argument.
Yeah, Adriaan, let me bring you in here. Mr. Manyi essentially saying what is unfolded here and what we're seeing was clear malice on the part of Downer and Karyn Maughan. What is your response to that?
By the way, before he responds, this guy is a serial offender. Just before, Adriaan, sorry about that. This guy, by the way, is a serial offender. You know, if you understood...
Which guy?
Downer.
Yes.
He's a serial offender. This guy's not doing it for the first time. You know, if you understood Xhosa, would say, indoda enganasifuba, khatyo idonke esifubeni.
He can't hold anything in.
Yeah.
Okay. We need to bring it. I've given you a chance, Mr. Manyi. Please, let's have a balanced conversation, please. Quickly, please.
30 seconds. He did this for the first time with a Mare and Lebohang with Sam Soul. He has done this. So he's a serial offender. He's done this with Sam Soul, with a Mare and Lebohang. Also, if you look at the book of Andrew Feinstein, Push 220, he even disclosed that they were going to charge Zuma even before. So this guy, this is his character.
Let's have a balanced conversation, Mr. Manyi, please. Adriaan, I asked you a question there and I said, well, are we seeing intentional malice on the part of Karyn Maughan and Billy Downer here, where there is an unfair advantage perhaps, and that's where I really want to bring it in and say there is an unfair advantage that Karyn Maughan is given over other journalists in the country by being given information that other journalists really cannot access, and laws have been broken. What do you say to that?
Morning, Naledi. Thank you very much for having me and for the opportunity. I think that the only malice in this case is from Mr. Zuma. It is very clear if you look at the merits of this case that it's an absolute nonsense case. Court papers is the issue at heart here. Now, we have a ruling in this country which was made by the Supreme Court of Appeal. It's the so-called Sanroll case. That declared all court papers are public records. Every document filed with court is a public record, which means any member of the public, including any journalist, can obtain this document. It is completely normal for journalists in South Africa to ask parties to any court case for their court papers. It happens every day, and this should not be a surprise to any journalist who's covered a court case. The facts of this matter is that, firstly, I'm very interested also to hear that Mr. Manyi is now saying it's not about the medical records, because that was a drum they've been beating for many months, and they know it's false because it wasn't Mr. Zuma's medical records. In fact, it was one doctor's note of one page, which they themselves, their own legal team, submitted to court and placed in the public record. So they've realized they can no longer rely on that argument that News 24, any journalist for that matter, disclosed Mr. Zuma's medical records because they themselves put it in the court, and it was a doctor's note, it wasn't medical records. But just to come back to the issue of court papers, the facts of the matter are very clear. Karyn Maughan has been covering the Zuma trial for more than 50 years, since Mr. Zuma was charged for the first time. She's the journalist who's been covering it for the longest time, and she has immense institutional memory and background on this case, which gives us some clue on why Mr. Zuma is specifically targeting her. She was covering this case. She heard that the state, that there was going to be an application for a postponement because Mr. Zuma was moved from the escort prison where he was incarcerated after his conviction. He was moved to a hospital in Pretoria. She then asked the parties involved for the court papers, and it was emailed to her late the afternoon before the hearing was going to commence in court, with the very clear understanding that she cannot publish these papers. Now, what's also interesting and what's curious about this case is the communication between her was with Advocate Andrew Breitenbach, who is a private advocate in private practice, who was acting on behalf of Mr. Downer in this case. She was never communicating directly with Mr. Downer. She has no communication with Mr. Downer about this matter at all. But Karyn Maughan asked for the court papers. It was given to her. My understanding is after it was emailed to the court. At the time we had COVID, there wasn't any physical activity at court, and documents were served via email, which we will argue in court clearly shows that documents were already in the ambit of the court, but with the clear understanding still that we can only publish stories from these court papers the next morning when they were filed in the court's ambit. The next morning, Mr. Zuma also filed his court papers at court with this doctor's note, and we then published a story about 2 hours after that was filed. So, Naledi, our case and our view is very strongly that this is a nonsense case. This is a criminal case. This is not Mr. Zuma suing Karyn on News 24 or taking us to the Ombudsman. They are asking the court to imprison a journalist. And this is a very, very serious and dangerous moment for media freedom in this country, when a former president can ask that a journalist be imprisoned for essentially doing a job, even if they legitimately believe, which we don't think is the case, but even if they believe she did something wrong. Yeah. To ask for imprisonment of a journalist for doing a job is really, really aggravating. It is a dangerous sentiment. We've heard all the media freedom institutions in this country condemning this move this week, and we will defend it and defend Karyn Maughan to the hilt.
Okay, so I'm going to bring that back to you, Mr. Manyi.
As you do, can you ask your producer to please flight the lawyer, because this man is talking nonsense here. Can you just place the law so that you can talk facts? He's just talking and talking.
Well, okay, but let me ask you this.
No. Can we have this thing on here? Can you just please put it on the screen, because I've asked for it so that you can talk facts, because the law says any document as well. So it makes light of the fact that it was this and it was not that. Yet the law is very clear. Any information, any document. So whether it was a one pager or a half a pager is any document.
Let me ask you a question, Mr. Manyi. Please allow me please to ask you a question here and say, it certainly is one thing where you've got the former president and the foundation perhaps taking on Downer about the legal elements of this case. That there is a legal issue. I'm concerned perhaps around whether or not the involvement of a media practitioner does something for media freedom in the country. What do you say to that? Let's focus particularly on them, because my show is about media. Okay. I'm not here to argue the merits of the case.
Okay, good. I think the very first thing that you should do as the media is to go and try and go for an amendment of the law to make exclusion for yourselves, because right now the law does not recognize media. The law does not that particular section of the law does not recognize the issue that you're trying to bring. The law simply says you shall not do this, as it were, to any other person. It does not make an exclusion and say, except if you're a journalist, except if you're a media. So this is what we're dealing with, a narrow issue of what the law requires, the behavior that is required by the law, you know. So, and also, it's not President Zuma that says be in prison. It's the law. It's subsection 7 of the law that says so. 41 subsection 7 that says if you contravene this, it's because this is so serious that you can go to jail for 15 years. And the reason for this, it's because the law is trying to protect the integrity of the criminal justice system. Can you imagine, Naledi, if it was you?
How do you feel about media freedom? I really want to hear your position on that, Mr. Manyi. I'm talking specifically about the media and its operations.
Media freedom it's something that we support fully. And in fact, if this was about media freedom, by the way, as I say, there would have been an embargoed debriefing of all media. You can't say media freedom when you just mean Karyn. Karyn can't constitute media freedom. Media freedom would have meant call everyone, give everyone a fair crack at it. Why is it that on the 10th, the next day, that only then that everybody got to see this, but Karyn had an overnight on it.
This is what you asked us to show.
Yeah.
What are we looking at?
Just go to B. Where is that thing? Where can I see it?
Here. You can look on that side, yes.
Okay. Okay, I just wanted to just show there that, okay, if you read this thing, which shall I read now?
Yeah.
Notwithstanding any other law, just focus on subsection 6. Notwithstanding any other law, no person shall, without the permission of the national director or a person authorized in writing by the national director, disclose to any other person. You see here, there is no exclusion to say to any other person except Karyn, to any other person except journalist, to accept media, no such a thing, to any other person. And this is the basis that we're dealing with this. Any information which came to his or her knowledge in the performance of the functions, etc. of the law. That's it. And then B says the contents of any book or any document or any item in possession of the prosecuting authority. So you can't have Adriaan saying, no, it was just a page. It is any document. It is any other item. That's the issue that we're dealing with.
I think
it's an open and shut case.
All right. I'm so upset that I'm out of time. I am genuinely upset that I'm out of time because this has been a very rich discussion and I imagine one that's going to continue in the country for a very long time. Adriaan, thank you so much for speaking to us. I think last thoughts from you before I let you go. And I've got about a minute here, Adriaan.
Yes, just very closely, that act speaks very clearly to NPA employees, and that's why Mr. Zuma laid a criminal complaint against Billy Downer last year, which was rejected by the NPA. There was never a criminal complaint against Karyn Maughan. Until this day, Mr. Zuma has not gone to the police to open a complaint. There's not a nollie prosecute certificate against Karyn Maughan, and that act clearly doesn't speak to journalists or anyone asking for information. So again, I think it's absolutely malicious that Karyn Maughan has been dragged into this matter. The NPA can speak for themselves. Us, we are speaking up for the media freedom, for the rights of all journalists, and we will defend Karyn in this matter.
Thank you so much. But Mr. Zuma is proceeding with the private prosecution.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Okay. Let's see if it
Downer is accused number 1, Karyn is accused number 2.
Okay, let's leave it there.
And make that case in court.
I'm out of time. That was an interesting discussion and certainly one that can continue even on Twitter. Hashtag SABC Media Society. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to my guests, Mr. Mzwanele, Manyi, spokesperson for the Jacob Zuma Foundation, as well as Adriaan Basson, editor-in-chief at News 24. Catch us again next week, Sunday morning rather. Same time, same place. Have yourselves a fabulous Sunday morning.